Hey, good afternoon, and welcome to the Riverwood Conservancy's latest Facebook Live presentation, Understanding Nature, Identifying Tracks. Some really interesting content, I'm sure, is on the way over the next 45 minutes to an hour or so. We'll see how time goes. And we had a lot of interest in this topic, so thanks so much for joining us today. Hope you're doing well and staying safe. My name is Rashid Clark. I'm the marketing specialist at the Riverwood Conservancy. Before we get into today's presentation, just a couple of notes about how the lockdown is affecting the Riverwood Conservancy and Riverwood, the park itself. First of all, the park is open. Parking lots at Riverwood remain open. So if you do want to get outside and get some fresh air and exercise, of course, you're welcome to do so in small groups with members of your immediate household. And as much as possible, do try to maintain physical distance from others in the park. We also will be continuing some of our in-person programming, again, with strict gathering limits in place for the next few days. All details on our events are at theriverwoodconservancy.org. And while you're on our website, you'll hopefully have a look at our new nature gift guide, which is our way of providing some green, eco-friendly gifts, gift ideas for the holiday season. And also, you can do it in a way that supports our environmental work and programs like this, which we hope you enjoy. If you have questions at all throughout the presentation today, please type them into the comments section. We'll get to them as we go along. And I will soon turn things over to Dave Taylor, our resident wildlife photographer and wildlife expert, also the author of more than 40 books on wildlife and ecology. And Dave has also produced educational videos and material about wildlife for school curriculum. So Dave, I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you, Rashid, and I'd like to welcome everybody to today's show. At the very beginning, a little heads up. Because we're talking about tracks and things you're going to see in your neighborhood, some of them might be, well, I wouldn't say inappropriate. There's nothing that, I know there's some kids watching, there's nothing that they wouldn't see on a walk around their yard, but they probably never thought of it. And seeing it in the context of a slideshow might give it a different emphasis. So just be aware that there might be some images coming up that might be a little offensive. I don't mean them to be, and there's good reasons to show them. So let's see what happens. We're going to talk about reading sign, and particularly the sign we're talking about are tracks. If you're out in the walking, especially in winter, you're going to have an opportunity to see animal tracks. And usually you don't even see this much of the animal. You just see the tracks. And you're left wondering, what went here? What animal passed by? What was it doing? What's the story behind these tracks? So in this case, the tracks belong to a long-tailed weasel. You would be surprised how common weasels are in our neighborhoods. I live about a mile from Riverwood, and I've had weasel once or twice in the backyard. Never saw them, but we were able to find their kills and identify by the distinctive way that a weasel hunts and kills that it was in fact a weasel. They're around. And if you have chipmunks and small mammals in your backyard, sooner or later the weasel's going to find you. But they're going to be moving rapidly and you're not going to see them around. They don't hang around very often. It is always nice when you get to see the animal making sign, whether it's leaving tracks or in this case, drilling holes in a tree. This is the pileated woodpecker. If you cover up the picture of the woodpecker, you're left with an image of these large holes. This is very typical of the pileated. And each species of woodpecker will leave different sorts of traces in trees. But like I say, it's really helpful if you get to see the animal actually doing it. Some animals just can't be ignored. If you've been following my YouTube channel, you know that I've been doing some work with beavers over the last several months. It's sort of been a project that's helped me get through COVID. And beavers are really obvious. They tend to build very large lodges, and you can see them in many places. I'm estimating, and it's my estimate, nobody else's, I think there's probably upwards between 80 and 100 beavers living in the city of Mississauga. Most of them down by Lake Ontario. And not all of them build lodges like this. Some are bank dwellers. We have a beaver that has gotten active again at Riverwood, but I have no idea where its lodge is. That's something I look forward to maybe looking into in the near future. And then some of the signs are really subtle. A hole in the ground. What dug it? Was it a meadow vole? Was it a vole? What animal created this? Was it a chipmunk? The way to tell is to look at them and to judge the size. If it's a big hole, it's going to be the size, big enough for a coyote to go in, probably a coyote. If it's a small hole, it could be a vole or a mouse. You'll find these things in grasslands all over the place. This is probably chipmunk. One way of telling if the hole is active, if you see spider webs across the hole, you know that the animal is not there and not using it. If there are no spider webs, it's probably very active. And you may see these in your backyard. Sometimes you're out for a walk and you'll see meandering tracks. If you follow them, it can lead you to some interesting adventures, but often you won't see the animal because they'll hear you coming. This is the track of a doe and a fawn, a yearling fawn, almost a year old, and they're wandering across the grassland, actually a lawn, just looking for food. Deer are our largest mammal in Mississauga and the Credit River Valley area, and their tracks are fairly distinguishable. They're very heart-shaped. The toes point in the direction that the animal is going. You can see there's a bit of a drag mark. This is probably a doe. This track is even harder to see. This is in mud. It's a deer track. It's right in the center of the picture, but you may not be able to make it out very clearly. But it's a subtle track. Deer are much easier to track in the snow than they are in the forest. And this track is a track of a buck. You can tell it's a buck in a couple of ways. Notice how much deeper the toes have sunk in. Now, I'll grant you, it's different surfaces, and that's not really a good way of telling. But what you do pick up just behind the toe is another indentation. Bucks have 4 toes. They have 2 that go into the ground, and they have 2 up, basically what you think on their ankle. It's really in their foot. And if it's a big buck, when he steps down, his foot's going to flatten, and those other 2 toes will show up. So if you see tracks like this followed by 2 dots behind them, you're almost certainly looking at a buck, a big male deer. This is also an indication that you've got a deer in the property. This is called a rub. In the early part of fall, late summer, the deer start to rub off the velvet. So do moose, so do elk. And when they do it, they like to have something that fights back. And a young tree that's got some movement in it, they'll push against it and they'll go up and down and they'll scrape most of the branches off in an effort to get rid of the velvet, which by this point is probably itchy. Later in the season, they'll use those trees as sparring partners just to get a little bit of their rutting energy out. This is the part I was referring to earlier. When you're out walking with kids, and if I were on a field trip and we saw this, we would stop. And if any of you are students of mine or have been with me on a walk, you'll know that I'm famous for this. This is coyote. This is coyote scat or poop. And it's probably the best way of telling if you've got a coyote in your area. Now you look at that and you say, well, that's dog dirt. Well, no, coyotes are dogs, but dogs don't generally have nuts and fruits and things in their dropping. They don't generally have hair because we tend to feed our puppies and pets kind of a mixture of food that's got all sorts of things wrapped up in it. And when the dog produces waste, and we all go, its poop is much more consistent, and I'll tell you, a lot smellier. Just a heads up, never touch poop in the woods. It can carry bacteria. If you're going to examine it at a distance or with a long stick. This one, you can see chunks of vegetable, some nuts. When I worked at Britannia School Farm 30 years ago, We had pumpkins that we grew. The pumpkin growing was a disaster, but that's okay. We had all these pumpkins we had to get rid of, so we put them out. Well, we had coyotes on the property, and they ate the pumpkins, and for weeks, coyote scat was bright orange and really, really easy to see. If you see a mixture of food, and especially with hair, you're dealing with a predator. Now, this is also a predator. This is bear poop. And you'll notice it's loaded with seeds. Part of the whole life cycle of a plant, and some plants, particularly raspberries, blueberries, is to get eaten by an animal and then deposited in their droppings. And the further away they take those seeds, the better, more successful the plant is, because they don't want to have their offspring dropped where they're already growing successfully. So animals are tricked into taking these seeds away by eating the sweet, nutritious seeds, or not seeds, berries, but they can't eat the seeds. And a lot of the time, the seeds need the digestive juices of the animal to soften up. So when a bear does this, he is planting a bear garden. But it happens in your backyard. Look at your windshield of your car occasionally. You might see bird poop on it. Often it'll have seeds in it. Birds are tricked into doing the same thing. Nature is just amazing in the stories. This is deer droppings. They're kind of in the center of the picture in the snow. This is winter deer droppings. Deer droppings and rabbit droppings look very similar. They're very woody in the winter because they're eating wood-type food. And in order to conserve moisture, now you don't think when there's all that snow out there, there'd be any problem with drinking snow. But the problem is, in order to get moisture from snow, you have to eat a lot of it. And if you eat a lot of snow, your body has to melt it, and that takes up energy. So in order to conserve moisture when there is very little moisture in winter, animals like rabbits and deer and moose produce droppings that are very, very dry. And about 60%, 50 to 60% of the dropping is reusable. So they will actually maybe go back and re-eat them when times are really tough. Rabbits particularly are known for that. You can tell this is a deer dropping as opposed to rabbit dropping because it's in a pile. Rabbits tend to hop along and leave little deposits as they go. This too is deer dropping. As the sun came out, the droppings melted into the snow. Now, we're going to do a little exercise here. You're out walking and you see this in the snow. Well, what's happened here? There's a story here. Are there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 participants? Kind of hard to know. So let's take a little bit of an in-depth look at this. These animal tracks, particularly in winter, that's the easiest time to read them. And hopefully we'll get a chance to do a live workshop after this COVID lockdown goes away. Questions to ask yourself: which way is the animal traveling? Do the animals travel at the same time? What animal made these tracks? And what were the animals doing? And you can apply those questions to dinosaur trackways out west. You can apply them to trackways in your backyard, or even when you go for a walk around the block with your dog. If you start looking at the tracks, there are stories. Your dog probably knows more of the story than you do. So there are 4 animals in this set of tracks. The blue, there's blue arrows, and they go across and they come down. There's the red arrows, which are going across and up. The purple ones are going off to the side, and the green ones are going from that little grassy mound a little further up. So there's been 4 different animals here, and each one's got its own story. 1, 2 at least are carnivores. Let's see what happens. So if we take a closer look, you look at the red tracks, you can see the direction the animals are going because its claws are pointing in that way. The blue and the green tracks show tail marks which drag along. Now, the green and the blue must be fairly small animals because they're leaving trail tracks. That's probably indicating they're a mouse or a vole of some sort. And the purple tracks are much older because the snow is blowing in. And you should be able, when you're out, recognize fresh tracks from older tracks. Fresh tracks, especially, are very clear, and you can see the toe prints. You might even see wing marks. Given a day or two to age, they get softer. They just kind of look like they're indentations in the ground. So whatever made the purple tracks was there before the events that the green and the purple tell, or the green and the blue tell us about. So here you can see the tracks. The green represent one animal, the purple another, and the purple are again obscured. What's happening here is, particularly if you look at the blue tracks, you'll notice there's a linear line to them, and they've got little tail marks. So this is a little animal that's hopping along, and when you see tracks in the snow, especially with squirrel tracks, these aren't squirrels, by the way, if you see two tracks side by side and then two smaller tracks in front, side by side tracks are usually the tracks of an animal that does a lot of things, spends a lot of time in trees. So think squirrels and think birds. We'll talk about rabbits in a bit. This animal is too small to be a squirrel, and squirrel trails don't normally drag. So what we've got here is a small mammal hopping along, probably, well, given the location, which is in a field, it's probably a vole, and the tail is quite short. So here's what happened in the order of events, and I'm reading from the screen. So 1, a dog runs through the meadow a day before the other tracks were laid down. We know that because the snow has drifted in, obscuring the tracks, and the distance between their patterns suggests the dog was bounding. So it wasn't just walking, it was jumping and running, maybe playing fetch with its master. We can't really say too much about that. After the dog went by, the temperature dropped, and the snow froze almost into ice. Now, how do we know that? Well, the evidence is that meadow voles rarely come to the surface in the snow when it's soft, because they can push through it. But when there's ice on top, two things happen. It gets harder to push through, especially if it goes right down to the bottom. But ice traps air in, and you get a buildup of carbon monoxide. And even though, like us, we can't deal with a lot of carbon monoxide, neither can they, although they can deal with it more than we can. So they have to push up, come out of the snow, and they run along. And that's why we have their tracks on the top. So the meadow tracks are in green and blue. One set of meadow tracks is going up, the other is coming down. The green trail is that of a meadow vole heading out to feed, probably at night, and it's walking at a slow pace. You can see the tracks are much closer together, and it's rare to see them in the daytime, although they are certainly out in the daytime, but they face greater danger from hawks, coyotes, foxes. At night, they have to face owls, but they're in danger from owls even when they're under the snow. The meadow vole is then coming back, senses the fox, and makes a run for it. That's the blue color. You notice the tracks are further apart. The grass in the bottom is the meadow vole's nest. It's trying to get there. The fox comes along, bounds as the meadow vole tries to get beneath the snow, and then grabs it. Probably eats it on sight. There's no blood, but meadow voles are just a snack. And then the fox walks off. So all of that at Riverwood, a few years ago actually, in one story. Now, that's my version of it. Is it correct? Well, the only way of knowing that it's 100% correct is to have sat and watched. And that's a luxury that unfortunately I don't have, maybe you do. But I've seen enough times, photographed it enough times to know that this is what happens. This fox is bounding up to come down with all 4 feet in an attempt to catch the meadow vole you can just see in the picture there. So it does happen. Now, getting back to those other tracks, we have images here of gray squirrel and rabbit. If you take a look at them, which ones, given what I said earlier, are the squirrels and which ones are the rabbits. And again, side by side tells you that it's not a tree dweller, or sorry, it is a tree dweller. And rabbits don't dwell in trees. So the rabbit obviously is the bluer picture at the top. Now, the next question to ask you is which are the front feet and which are the back feet? And that's a little trickier to answer. You would think the feet in front are the front feet, the prints in front, and the prints in back are the back feet. But you would be wrong. It's so the animal hops forward on its back feet and puts them down, and then it reaches forward. Hops forward, puts its front feet down, then leaps forward and puts its back feet in front of where its front feet were, and pushes off, and then the front feet come down, and the back feet go in front, and they push off, and so they hop off. And that's really what you're seeing here. So here's another indication. You can see the pairs of feet backwards and frontwards. You can see the rabbit, particularly how they're not the back feet. The back prints, which are the prints of the front feet, are behind the back feet. And it's the same with squirrels. And here you can see pictures of a rabbit hopping away. Its front feet comes down. In the third image, you can see its back feet are going to go in front of its front feet. They push off, leap out. Bears do a similar thing, although a bear is a bit longer and its gait is differently. So its tracks are not as easy to read. Bears' feet footprints are very, very distinctive, though. So let's take a look at deer. You're going to see a lot of deer tracks if you go through Riverwood. What's the deer doing? Now, deer do a lot of things, and they have a lot of styles of movement. They can lie down. They can walk. They can walk alertly. They can casually feed. They can walk in a sort of semi-fright. They can bound, or they can really run. And each of these pictures shows a different gait of the deer. So the first picture is a deer bedded at rest. And if you're out where there are a lot of deer, look for deer beds, especially in the snow. The snow will be compacted, often melted right down to the ground, and you might see bare leaves. They like to lie in the snow because the snow actually insulates them. It keeps their body heat in. So deer will do that. Deer casually walking, their tracks are close together. There's often more than one deer. There's no distance between them. It's a definite sort of casual walk. The alert walk, there's more of a distance between the feet. They're not just strolling. They're alert to something. They're moving away from something. They may have sensed you, and they're stepping a little further apart. And then there's the alarmed walk, which is going to be a little more hurried. They're going to put more weight on their feet. They're going to come down a little harder. And then there's the leap. Now, deer might leap for all sorts of reasons, to jump over something, just to move a little bit further out of the way. If they're really, really fleeing danger, their leaps will be quite a distance apart. And you'll see them go up, and you'll see them quite a distance away. And if you watch deer tracks and you follow them, you'll find that the deer go places and through things that you just wouldn't believe. I've seen deer tracks that lead into places where the opening is about my waist height, and the deer has ducked down its head and gone through. I'm not as inclined to go that route anymore, so I don't bother following the track any further. So it will surprise you, though, if you follow them. These are some common tracks. Raccoons are going to be in your backyard. You're going to see them. In the mud, you can clearly see the handprints. But you notice in the different textures here, the tracks look different. It might slip in the mud, and it might have kind of a swishiness to it. The snow, if it's just light snow, it might be a very clear print. It might just be a wet footprint on dry sidewalks. Um, they're they look different, and when you start looking at tracks enough, you will start to be able to read them a bit more. The back footprint of a raccoon is very different than the front footprint. Back footprint will kind of remind you of your footprint, and the front footprint will remind you of a hand. And indeed, when you watch raccoons feed, they pick up stuff with their hands and they stick in their mouth, and they use their front paws very much like we use our hands, assuming you wander around and catch crayfish. Weasel tracks look like this. They're paired because weasels hop. And it's like almost, they remind me of a sling, the toy, the slinky. They kind of go and they hump and they go and they hump and they go and they hump. And as a result, you get these pairs of tracks. To me, it is very difficult to identify a mink track from a weasel track. But I use location. If it's along the riverside or a pond, chances are more likely to be a mink. If it's middle of a grassy field, in the woods, I'm thinking weasel. But I'm thinking, I am not guaranteeing that. I can identify the tracks as weasel, but these two animals are very close in size. And when you see the tracks, unless you've got them side by side and you have a weasel and a mink running together, which doesn't happen, you might be, I think you would be able to tell the tracks, but just coming across them. Now, this is obviously a kill site. There's blood. And there's some remains and some droppings. This is a place where a coyote has come along and it's startled a rabbit that's kind of holed up and hunkered down in the deep snow. It's grabbed the rabbit, killed it, and eaten it right on site. So the blood in the snow is a really good indication that something is going on. It might also be an owl that you'd find. But finding a coyote sign is probably going to give you a bit of a thrill. It may make you nervous if you're walking your dog. You might just think, well, there's a predator out there. How do you tell the difference? Dog tracks and coyote tracks really, really look the same. So if you're walking around your street after fresh snow and you see dog tracks, first thing I look for is, are there people tracks with them? Coyotes generally don't walk with people. Excuse me. But then you have to decide, did the person and the dog walk together, or did the coyote go along and then a person like me is following it? The way to tell is to look at the freshness of the tracks. Are they look the same age? Are they both blowing in a bit? Are they both, if they got fresh snow in it? Take a look at it and make that determination. That's one way of telling. Coyotes also have a definite kind of walk. Dogs are kind of, goofy. My daughters both have dogs, and I love the dogs dearly. But when they're out walking, they're going, oh, I'm going to go over here now. Whoop, there's something over there. And they're wandering all over the place. Happy as larks, just investigating. Coyotes and wolves, in my experience, tend to know where they're going, and they go there. And the same with foxes. Foxes' tracks look like dogs, but they also look like cats. And they're very deliberate. They're mincing. They follow along like little white dots going along like you saw earlier. Coyotes, their tracks are bigger and they tend to be a little bit further apart. So you found dog tracks or you found coyote tracks, and you don't know which. If they're going well away from where people are, given our leash laws and everything, you're pretty much sure you got a coyote. But the other way of telling is to take a look at the track itself. And this is a little trick that's kind of fun to do and entertain people with. If you take a look at the front toes of the dog, these are the front toes. If the front two toes point straight, that's a dog. If the two toes, I can't do it with my fingers because that would hurt. If the two toes point towards each other and you draw a line from the lines cross, then you've got a coyote. And I think when you start looking for this, you will be surprised how often you find coyotes. And I just should say a word here in defense of coyotes. When we have coyotes in an area, it's a sign that I think we have a very healthy ecosystem. They are the top predator in our area. That and great horned owls and red-tailed hawks. If you have those birds and mammals around, you've got something good going. So people say, well, we've got to get rid of the coyote. I have a book on black bears that's coming out next year, and I was speaking to one of the black bear experts, and he was telling me that in his research, black bears, and there's no black bears in Mississauga, unfortunately, but black bears, if they live around people, they learn to avoid people, they're not problems. But when you get rid of that black bear because people say, oh, there's a bear out there, we got to get rid of it, and it's a bear that's been around for a while, then you get new bears coming in, and they may not be as well-mannered. And I think the same is true of coyotes. We have lots of coyotes in Mississauga. Probably for the area, we have got more coyotes here than Algonquin Park has wolves in the same area. And I've got to talk about that. Our coyotes generally are pretty well behaved. Yeah, they eat the occasional cat, but research that's been done on them with radio tracking and studies that have shown that they really don't eat very many domestic animals. They're more likely to eat your pumpkins, and even that's rare. They are existing on squirrels and occasional deer and other animals, birds. They're not really a threat to us. Now, sometimes they are a threat. It would be wrong to say that they're perfectly harmless. But I prefer to have coyotes in my neighborhood. I like them. I like knowing they're there. They belong there, and I think it's a healthy sign that we have them at Riverwood. But I would not encourage anybody to feed them. And if you're going to observe them from a distance. And if you're walking a small dog in particular, make sure your dog stays on leash and carry a stick just in case. That's advice that a dog walker at Riverwood has given me, and I pass it on to you because I think it's good advice. Okay, this is a deer bed. You notice the leaves, you can see them, you can see kind of the shape of the deer, and you can see some deer tracks going out. And often there will be droppings around it because they tend to go to the washroom very close to where they bed down. A couple of final things before I want to wrap this up. If you see something that looks like a track, it's a track. And sometimes it's just kind of, you're out walking, particularly in the spring, and you see something, and you think, something went there? No. And then you almost convince yourself that it didn't. But it's a track. And you can see here a track going along past some cedar trees, I think. It's pretty well defined, but it would be hard to say there's a track there. You just kind of know it. And I want to return to the study of scats again, just briefly. Scatology, which is the study of animal droppings, has become really important of late. And it's a really good thing for the animals, because back in the day when naturalists first started to study animals, the only way they figured out they could find out what an animal ate was to shoot the animal and open up its stomach and look and see, well, that's kind of hard on the animal. Nowadays, people are collecting animal droppings, taking them to a lab, purifying them. They wear gloves, they wear masks, and they're trying to determine what the animal eats. And it has saved an awful lot of animal lives, and it has given us some very rich insight into what animals eat. So, in your neighborhood, when you go out for a walk, I want you to just take a look. Look at the bird tracks on the ground. Are they hopping birds or are they walking birds? Turkeys walk, sparrows tend to hop. Look for signs where a Cooper's hawk has taken its prey. Might be some feathers drifting down or blowing across your lawn. You might actually see the kill site. Look for droppings. When you walk your dog, pay attention to what your dog pays attention to, especially if there's snow on the ground. He or she may look at coyote tracks, and she may be very interested in them. Look for raccoon tracks. Just be aware, you don't have to go to Riverwood to do tracking in the snow. Animals, particularly in these COVID times, they're all around us. So get out, take a look at animals, look at the animal tracks. Hopefully you'll see them both. And I hope you have good viewing. And now we'll take some questions.
We will indeed. Thanks so much, Dave. Another wonderful presentation. In fact, a record breaker for us in terms of the number of live viewers we had. So good news all around for us at the Riverwood Conservancy there.
Thank you so much for joining us.
And also a pretty wide range, at least from some of the comments that we saw in terms of where people are watching from. Not too far away, but hello from Markham, from Karen, going a little bit further away from Christine, hello from Germany. So
Wow.
I think as far as we know, at least in terms of the people who have commented, Christine, I think you're our first German viewer, so welcome and thank you for joining us today. And also, let's see, another Mississauga, and yeah, hello from Wild Mississauga. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and yeah, we will get to some questions. Before we get to that, just more of a question for the general audience. This one coming from Aaron, wondering if there are any teachers out there watching with their class. That's certainly what we hope when we have these presentations, that we do have some teachers and their students watching. So if you are a teacher or if you're watching right now with your class, please just drop us a note in the comments just to let us know that you're here, and we very much appreciate you being here with us.
I believe my granddaughter is watching, so hi, sweetie.
Get to some of the questions now. This one coming from Robert. How do you tell the direction of travel to determine whether the front feet were in front of or behind back feet? So I guess looking at how do you determine the direction of travel when you're looking at the tracks?
I generally look for the toes. Generally, that's which way the toes point, or generally the way the animal's going. I'm not trying to be facetious here, but very few animals walk backwards. And then there's the drag marks. If you see a long drag mark, the drag mark is usually thinner when it starts and gets a little thicker. It's going in the direction of the animal. Most animals don't drag their feet when they pick them up. Now, some do, but not most. So drag marks are another way. But basically, look for the toes. And if you can't see them, trust your judgment. And if you follow them backwards, like foxes after a snowfall, it can be really difficult to tell which way they're going. But if they're reasonably fresh, if you go back, if you're going the wrong way, the tracks will age. If you're going the right way, the tracks will get much clearer and sharper.
Next question coming from Jessica. What book or guide would you recommend to learn about wildlife tracks in North America? Good question. I think Dave has one right in front of him.
This one is what can you see it?
A little more to the center. There we go. Mammal Tracks and Sign.
Yeah, this is one of the best ones. They've just come up with a new edition. I don't have it. They also have one on birds. Those two are really, really good ones. The tracker, I can't remember his name, is really good. If I think of the name, I'll come back to it. But there are those two books. Stokes has a book on tracking and interpretation of tracks. Peterson has the Mammal Guide, has tracks in them. But these two books, to me, are the kind of the go-to Bible. They're really rich, and they have a good section on scatology and feathers and skulls and bones. It's not just tracks. So that's a really good way of learning about them.
Just get to a couple of, just, because we feel like it. Hi from Oakville, from Shirley. Hello from the Waterloo region, from Robert.
Wow.
Going out towards Niagara for Tracy. And from Leesburg, Virginia, Jesse. Very
Happy
cool.
Thanksgiving to all
Happy
of our
Thanksgiving,
friends.
Jesse. Yes, to Jesse, to all of our American friends, happy Thanksgiving. And from Guelph, Sandy. Very, so a really nice range
Wow.
of viewers today, and we do appreciate that. And a nice comment from Andrew here. Thank you. Learned a couple things and headed out to the bush now. So Andrew, enjoy your time outside. Please be safe.
Have a good walk.
A question now from Johnny. Can you talk about snowy owl pellets versus coyote scat?
Oh, yeah, there's no question they're going to look very different. Owls produce the pellets. Usually it's feathers and bones and whatnot. They're solid. And of all the animal droppings, for those of you that don't know what a pellet is, owls, just about all birds, but owls and hawks are particularly noteworthy. The food goes into their crop and it kind of gets digested, and they don't want to have to carry a lot of extra weight around because being birds, they got to be light to fly. So they will throw up the pellet. And it is the one thing I think that you can handle reasonably safely if you're out in the woods. And it will be a conglomeration, usually gray. It'll have feathers. And if you break it apart, it'll have intact skulls. Well, not quite intact because they usually bite through the top of the skull. But you'll see teeth, you'll see bones, you'll see everything but meat. There is no meat in that, and there's probably no fruit. I've never seen an owl with fruit. So, and the way to find an owl pellet is to wait until there's been a snowfall and then get out and take a look after the sun has come out, because the pellet will warm up and it'll melt into the snow and it will become very obvious. So I can't say I've found very many snowy owl pellets, but if you've been lucky enough to see them, throw them up and you can collect them, that's great.
And yeah, I'm looking at the comments now, and quite a few teachers chiming in to say that they are watching and helping to develop some of their classes, and we do appreciate you taking the time and sharing this with your class. And for all the teachers watching out there, just thank you for all the work that you're doing amidst everything that we're dealing with COVID. Some really essential work obviously being done, and we do appreciate all the work that you're doing. Next question coming in from Marjane. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. When is a good time to go out animal spotting for tracks? Morning, late afternoon? Is there a better time? Or is it kind of weather dependent?
Weather dependent, but morning. Morning after fresh snow, before people are getting out and about, that is really one of the best times to go. So if you're going to do tracking around your neighborhood, get out first thing in the morning and before the cars and everything starts to go on the road. That is really the best time. By afternoon, you're getting people walking their dogs, you're getting kids playing in the snow. It just changes and not a lot of animals are active between morning and afternoon. Even deer bed down. So definitely the morning, best time to get out there. Absolutely.
Next question coming from Sandy. Is there evidence of bobcats in southern Ontario, and I guess particularly the Guelph Courtright Waterfowl Park area?
Actually, Sandy, I can't speak specifically about that area, but I can in general say that there have been more sightings of bobcat that I've heard about recently than ever before. It gives me hope that the bobcat is going to show up and will turn up on a camera trap, or somebody will see one. We did have a report of a bobcat just before I started working at Riverwood, which would be 2003. Somebody reported seeing what they thought was a bobcat on the other side of the Burnhamthorpe Bridge. I have heard specifically in the Guelph area, and this would be 25 years ago when I was out there with a group of friends for dinner, the restaurateur telling us that they'd seen bobcat. And I just recently heard somebody else had reported seeing a bobcat. They should be here. Our deer population is growing, and if we got coyotes feeding on deer occasionally, bobcat or even a more likely predator of deer, I just cannot see how they would not be making their way back through the province, because our deer herds are up. So I think bobcat are around. I think you're going to hear more and more about them, and I am excited. I've only seen a few bobcat in the wild. I'd love to see another one.
Going from bobcats to cougars, a question from Lauren. So I'll bring that back up. What about cougars? Do they make leaps and have mannerisms similar to deer? So if you're looking for cougar tracks, what sort of things would you be looking out for?
My experience with cougars has been fairly limited. I have seen one in the wild. I have been fortunate enough to photograph some for various projects under controlled conditions. And I've had to avoid an area where cougars were active. Cougars are cats. They leave cat tracks. There's no claw prints showing. They're a big animal. You'll know if you see a cougar footprint, you're going to think, "Oh, there's a lion here." They're not as big as a lion, but they will be noticeable. And cougars are certainly being reported from within the GTA. I had an uncle that was adamant that he saw one chasing deer out in Cranberry Marsh, and I said, "No, you couldn't have." And he described the cat. So I have to think he certainly saw something. It might have been somebody's pet that they released. There have been cougars sighted for years over on the Six Nations Reserve. I don't know if they're still seeing them there, but cougars are now listed in Ontario as being an animal that is in the province. Probably, no question, up around Lake of the Woods in that area. But there's sightings from all over the place. They're more common than sightings of Sasquatches in Ontario. So I'm pretty sure there are cougars here.
And we'll get down into some smaller wildlife here. A question from Maureen, totally not being paranoid, by the way. How can you tell if there are rats around the bird feeder? Legitimate question.
Look for big mice footprints and long tail drags. And there will be. We had rats in our neighborhood, and the people that were feeding the birds trapped the rats and got rid of them. But in North America, you're never more than, I think, 100 meters from a rat. They're just so common. So they're here. They're around. If they're coming to your feeder, you probably would see them if you kind of come down at night and take a look out. But look for their tracks. You're going to see the tail drag, especially in the snow is a couple of centimeters deep. And it's going to look like a mouse. It's not going to look like a possum, because the possum have the thumb that kind of go off on a weird angle. Rats look like, foot handprints. So, and don't be surprised if you see them. That said, I've only seen two rats in Mississauga in the 50 years I've lived here. And one was down on the lakeshore and one was at Riverwood.
And just for the interest of time, I think we'll just start to wrap up for now, but we'll get to one more question from Robert, looking at a way to decipher between a buck and a doe by looking at the tracks.
Again, look at the footprints. The two toes of the male are going to go in deeper. If they're side by side, you can certainly tell that. And the buck, almost invariably, because they're going to be so much heavier, his foot's going to come down. Like if it's on his toes, he's got these other two dew claws. He's going to push down onto those dew claws, and they're going to leave two tiny marks behind. And then he'll foot come up, and his drag marks will be in front of him. So his foot will come up, and it'll be a drag mark, and then he'll put it down. Deer are one of the animals where they do get a drag mark often in front, but it's the four marks as opposed to the two for the buck, and they'll be bigger, and they'll be deeper. Yeah. Well, this has been really fun.
It has been a lot of fun, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thanks to everyone chiming in on the comments, and also just letting you know where you're from. We had comments from BC, from Milton area, out by the shores of Lake Superior. It's Lake Superior in Goulet. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. So yeah, really great audience, great participation, great questions, and great presentation from Dave, as always. Thank you so much. Dave, for your time today, and thanks to
Pleasure.
everyone for joining us and having a really great discussion with us today.
Does
Just a
this
reminder.
make me an international star now? Can I put that on my
I
resume?
think you can now. We had the viewer from Germany, so yeah, I think that qualifies now as international.
May I wish everyone a Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, or whatever appropriate to you. Happy holidays coming up. Please stay healthy, wear a mask, all of that kind of stuff. And I look forward to seeing you in the new year. We've got 4 talks already planned. So take care, and thank you again, Rashid. As always, you do a marvelous job.
Oh, thank you so much, Dave. And again, thanks to everyone watching today. Yes, please do stay safe, whether you're in the Mississauga, Toronto area in lockdown mode or wherever you are. We are still dealing with a lot right now, and that'll probably be the case for the next little while. But as cliched as it is, we are in this together, and we're doing our part, all of us, to make life better, and we'll get to that point down the road. Dave mentioned the holidays coming up. Of course, they are. To our American friends watching today, happy Thanksgiving, and whatever you're celebrating, if you're celebrating in the next few weeks, happy holidays. And a reminder that for the holidays, we have now our nature gift guide available at our website, theriverwoodconservancy.org. It's a great way to spread some joy of the natural world, to spread some eco-friendly gifts, some green gifts. And while you're doing that, you're supporting our environmental work at Riverwood. You're helping us to continue our programs in the park once we can get them safely going again. And we do very much appreciate your support now and always. So hope you can have a look at that over on our website, theriverwoodconservancy.org. Keep an eye on our website as well for future events like this. As Dave mentioned, we are planning ahead for the new year, and we hope to have more virtual and, again, someday in-person events at Riverwood. It's coming. I promise you that. So Dave, thanks again for your time. Everyone watching today, thank you.
Thanks,
Please
everybody.
stay safe. Take care.
Bye bye.